Hello there, and welcome to the Fresh-Faced Film Bro podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about Christopher Nolan's latest film, Oppenheimer. Before we get started, I should note our future release schedule is currently pending. Me, along with my co-hosts, are all students, so our schedules fluctuate a bit, but we're going to do our best to get a regular schedule going. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my co-hosts.
I'm Mason.
Hello, I'm Jacob.
And I did not tell you my name, but it is Ethan. So let's dive right in. Okay. Initial thoughts, reactions. I want to get a one word going.
Floating. I was floating.
Floating.
I'll say striking.
Exhilarating is the word that comes to mind for me.
That's a good one.
All right. Floating. Jacob, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you guys were talking about exhilarating, and like the whole feeling I had with this movie was kind of going up an endless lift hill on a roller coaster. And there were multiple drops per se, but at the same time, there were also more lift hills. So it was like you were constantly in a state of either falling or just going straight up. And like your stomach was either just completely rising to your throat or dropping.
I like that a lot. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Mason.
Yeah, so with striking, I would say like narratively striking. Technically, it's striking. I think that like Nolan films are obviously like that's like what he's going for. He wants you to like come to the theaters. He wants you to see it in IMAX. And I think that like this is like one of his best films at just like absolutely like striking you.
Yeah, agreed. And in a similar vein, that's why I said exhilarating, mostly because of the pacing. I mean, he made a biopic at breakneck speed. It was ridiculous. Like I was sitting in the theater confused. I mean, you can look up his Wikipedia page, Oppenheimer's Wikipedia page, and it's fine. It's like comprehensible and you can digest it. You can be like, cool. But Nolan doing typical Nolan things made it as convoluted. I mean, in the convolution, he made it beautiful as well. It was like so thrilling to watch.
You know, I think we had talked about beforehand about the score, and we that's sort of what I want to talk about first, because you guys had said it was operatic, and I'd seen a few people like online and our people I know mention the score is a big talking point, and a lot of people even people who really love the movie would come to the point that, well, there's too much music or it was like too distracting. I've never seen a movie that out of a 3-hour runtime, about 2.5 hours of that was completely scored. I can count on one hand how many scenes didn't have music. And I feel like the music gave the movie so much heft that it felt so much different than, like, say, John Williams scores. I mean, those are blockbusters. They're going to be big. It's going to be big and bombastic. But with Oppenheimer, it's sort of another, big score in a similar vein, like a blockbuster. But there's something so sinister and unnerving about it. There's, not to get too musical theory-esque, but there's a lot of like microtonal dissonance.
Yeah,
and a lot of the score, it's very unnerving.
Yeah. And
that this big of a recording is like it just keeps going and going and going and going.
I mean, yeah, I think that's a understandable contention. When I was in the theater, I didn't notice how much the score was playing. So I think, I mean, obviously we'll talk more about the score in a second, but Ludwig did a fantastic job. And I think the score provides much needed levity and such like a weighty and just difficult film to watch, I mean, the flourishes, that the string flourishes and that motif that comes back in the cue that everybody talks about. Can you hear the music? I mean, it's just magnificent,
Yeah.
right? And so that there are definitely moments of beauty and awe, especially um paired with the sequences of the visions in Oppenheimer's head when he's like literally seeing the nuclear, like is it the fusion or fission reactions?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I think the music is paired wonderfully with film, and it only works to enhance that experience.
Yeah, I think with like any Nolan, I mean, he's kind of coming after like Nolan and Zimmer's collaborations in the past are like obviously like you have like the visual meets like the auditory, and that's like the great thing about the art form is like it's just putting like the two mediums together, and it's just eye opening, you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
you can't experience that anywhere else. And I think that Goranson coming after Zimmer is just like I think that was great for Goranson because he kind of knows what Zimmer was doing, and I mean you get that with Tenet, and then you get that here where it's just like score is obviously like very 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 important to the film.
Yeah, the baton was passed pretty like effortlessly. There's no bumps in the road. It kind of just they picked up where they left off, and yeah, so he picked up the slack for sure.
Yeah.
So Mason, I see you have some thoughts on the narrative similarities between this and Dunkirk, and specifically the chapters in the film. Do you want to elaborate about that at all?
Yeah, I just think that like I think this goes into like the editing by Jennifer Lame. We can talk about her more
Hmm.
like in a second, but I think that the like starting with the two chapters, you see the fission and then you see the fusion.
Hmm.
One of them's in color, one of them's in black and white. And I think just bouncing back and forth from both of those is, I mean, it's different than Tenet because Tenet is, or it's different than Dunkirk, excuse me.
Hmm.
Dunkirk is playing with like three storylines and they're all kind of intertwining. This is only two,
Hmm.
but I think that you can, like, I feel like through the editing and through like the bouncing back and forth between the chapters, that's where you get like the climax of the
Hmm.
movie, and that's where
Yeah.
he can really play like with your emotions.
And I think the editing is what is the strength of this film. It's really what keeps the pacing what it
Yep.
is, and what keeps a 3 hour viewing experience feel like 2:15 maybe. Like
Yep.
it doesn't feel like a long watch. It's yeah, the pacing's fantastic.
Pacing was great. The editing took a little bit to grow on me.
Hmm.
I grew to love it on second watch. I guess my main thing was the first time I was watching it, there's so much flying back and forth between, because I mean you're starting off with Strauss's cabinet interview with the Senate
Hmm.
and Oppenheimer's past, and like even jumping in the middle of there with his interrogation with the is it the CIA or the FBI? I think it's the FBI. I'm not
I
sure.
think
Either way,
so.
some government agency, and
Hmm.
I feel like there's, you're jumping back between the three. And so at the beginning, when you don't fully have your footing, it sort of feels like you're still watching the trailer. But once you watch the second time, you don't really get that feeling.
Mm.
Hmm.
I think
Yeah,
at first it can be kind of like, whoa, but after a while, I grew to really love how ambitious it was.
Yeah,
for sure.
certainly.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of ambition, I feel like Nolan covered a base that people have been harping on him for not covering forever, which is character development. Um, we see that he has some of the most fleshed out and deep characters to date in his films. Granted that they were real people that existed, but
Mm.
still, he does a great job within the runtime of making them feel round and whole and just real, I guess. Um,
Mm.
I would love to comment on the characters. So, admittedly, before Oppenheimer, the only Nolan movies I had seen were his latest three before this one. So I'd seen Interstellar, Dunkirk, and Tenet. And I loved Interstellar because I feel like, I even though I only saw Tenet in the theater. I watched Interstellar and Dunkirk in the comfort of my home, but I could tell, sort of right off the bat with my first Nolan movie, it was like, all right, it's very showy, it's very large and ambitious. But Interstellar really balanced out that ambition and abstract ideas with really good characters. And with Dunkirk and Tenet, now, I like Dunkirk, and Tenet was not my cup of tea. Granted, I only saw Tenet once,
More on that
but
later.
more on that later.
Yeah.
We'll revisit that at
Uh-oh.
some point.
Yeah, we have
So
some. Yeah, the folks in this podcast have some thoughts on Tenet. Yeah.
yeah, so we won't dwell too much on that. But what I was missing with those two was characters, and both those movies have a lot of things I really like about them. But I was sort of craving. I wanted to keep him, I want to let him keep his ambition, but at the same time, narratively, I wanted him to really refocus. And before Oppenheimer, I did myself a favor and watched all of his movies. And my favorite of his movies before I saw Oppenheimer was Memento, because
So
a
good.
that is a movie that is not ambitious in a technical sense, like most of his later movies, but is very ambitious narratively
Hmm.
and concept wise. And when I watched it, that movie filled a hole that I felt like was missing from his filmography. It was something I didn't know he could do, was write such an interesting and a, admittedly incredibly strange story about a man just trying to find the guy who murdered his wife. And I won't spoil how he did it, but that movie, I thought those characters and the characters like those people he interacted with and how they treated him and his whole background was all brilliant. And I wanted more of that in a Nolan movie. And with Oppenheimer, I got that and more.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah.
think before Oppenheimer, like I think you could argue that Nolan's best character is Guy Pearce's character in Memento.
For sure.
I think he sees like his arc. It's very clear to us. I mean,
Hmm.
he has all the narrative weight, but then comes in Oppenheimer, and then I think you could argue both for Cillian Murphy's character and RDJ's character. I
Hmm.
think they both kind of see the conclusion to their ideas, and I think that you could see both of them certainly getting a nomination come Oscar season, but maybe even a win too.
I would love to see Emily Blunt get a nod as well. She was spectacular, and I mean, the arc of her character is just amazing. It's not technically, I guess it's a hearing scene. The hearing scene was just, it was incredible to watch in the theaters.
Yeah.
So much fun. So American Prometheus, what do we think about that idea and how it was sort of expressed via, I guess, just Nolan's creativity and his vision?
Well, I mean, I think that adapting books is. I mean, we've been seeing that for years in the medium, and I think that it's it's a very, very, very hard book to adapt. I mean, I think it's 800 or 900 pages, and I think that it couldn't have been done without some of the like co-writers on it. They apparently they were like on set all the time, and they were making sure that it was historically accurate. I think by the end of the film, the co-writer had said that it was basically like 98 or 99% like accurate to what was written in the book, which is
That's
just
ridiculous. Yeah.
yeah, that's crazy for a movie.
You can tell that Nolan, it's a weird way of putting it, but it's almost like he loves Oppenheimer as a person.
Yeah.
He was given so much to work with, and there's just so much care and vision given to like his nuance as a human being. And I've read a couple biographies before. I'm not the biggest reader, but what I love in a biography is just if it's someone that I really admire and respect, that the biography does not sugarcoat their life.
Yep.
And Oppenheimer, given, I would say, in any other hands in Hollywood, it would have been they probably would have put him on a pedestal.
It would have
And
been easy to. Yeah.
and it's easy to. I mean, the average person did not know much about Oppenheimer before this movie. And he could have just been
The guy
saying,
who
like,
ended
what a
World War II. Yeah.
great American hero. But
Mhm.
here, Nolan reads this biography and realizes yeah, I feel like, no one has a fascination and empathy towards war. So maybe he went into this movie wanting to sort of tackle it like a Dunkirk, but when he read it,
Mhm.
he was like, whoa, he's so much more of a complicated man than I thought.
Mhm.
And the best way he could have done it.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of scenes where it's clear that he's not painted out to be some sort of hero. You know, the scene at the beginning with the apple, um, and then even when he is having an affair with his wife, uh, just how that's handled when he's out in the woods having a breakdown, and Emily Blunt's character basically comes and tells him to snap out of it.
Which is brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, it's he's not painted out to be Superman.
And he shouldn't be.
No, yeah, rightfully so. I think Nolan did right by being, as biographically accurate as he could without, sacrificing the personal narrative of the screenplay that he was adapting.
And I think that gives the film a really, really good weight to it. It's not
Mhm.
all sugar coated.
For sure.
It could be because I just love a good love story. Not that the love story in this movie
Yeah.
is good, but
Yeah.
it's very thought provoking. And
Mhm.
Certainly.
the way they portrayed it, I mean, the intimate scenes with Florence, with the Jean,
Yeah.
and Oppenheimer were done and peppered throughout the movie
Yeah.
so well. So you see again, he couldn't have done this movie any other way by just putting them on the pedestal. You see him for who he was, and
True. Hmm.
it's not like us as the audience is expected. No one doesn't frame Oppenheimer as someone to gang up on or hate. You empathize with him because you just
Yeah. You're given the whole
see,
picture. Yeah.
yeah, you're given the whole picture, and at the end of the day, he was human.
Hmm.
Yep.
All right. We're gonna pivot towards the technical side of things. Um, who wants to get us started off?
I would like to say one thing was that I first saw it in IMAX. I was able to see the movie twice, and on my second watch, I saw it in a very tiny theater that was probably about 25 seats big. And my thought when I walked into this theater was that this will not do the movie justice. I'm so glad to have seen it in IMAX. This is going to ruin the auditory experience for me. It did not. I actually even grew to appreciate it even more. While you definitely should see it in IMAX if you're given the luxury to. Seeing it in a regular theater, given that the theater's kept up pretty well,
Hmm.
is just as mind blowing. Also,
That's incredible.
yeah,
Because I mean, especially from a marketing standpoint, Nolan is like the guy who is telling people to see his film in IMAX and that it should only be seen that way in a true IMAX 70 millimeter format.
which I
But
would like to add, there are only about 10 70 millimeter projectors in the entirety of North America.
Yeah.
so we're gonna jump back to the score really quick. I have some notes that I've written down just about cues that stood out to me. But first off, I want to talk about Ludwig's approach to scoring this. My initial reaction to this, I have written down how much of the score is done in the box. Now, for the first couple cues, it sounds like a lot of this could have been done in Pro Tools, but in listening to interviews and reading up on it, he claims to have recorded a lot of it and in the studio, and it was done over the course of maybe 3 to 5 days, as I understand. And I think, and the technique that he keeps on talking about introducing in the interviews is what they did to record "Can You Hear the Music?" Because the whole idea of that is that sound accompanies the fusion reaction, or fission. Excuse me, I'm not a physicist. Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. But during that
It's not
reaction,
okay.
there are metric modulations that occur, and it's almost polyrhythmic in a sense. and that the tempo compounds by mathematical metrics. And so there was a whole system devised on how to get the ears for the players, like the metronomes correct, and that was played live in one take. So it wasn't comped. They did it all in real time, which I think is fascinating. And honestly, I would love to talk to the Pro Tools engineer about how he, I don't know, automated that, because that's crazy. But
Yeah.
I mean, it turned out great. It's phenomenal to listen to, and I was just like listening to it right before we got on, just feeling so jealous about how good both just like the recording sounds and how good the mix is. It feels so hefty, and like it's just it translates so beautifully in a theater setting, and just on a pair of AirPods. So it's awesome. Oh, and then I wanted to mention some cues that stood out to me. Obviously everybody loves Can You Hear the Music? Gravity Swallows Light was super interesting. I really liked the textures and the chord changes. And then Meeting Kitty was one of my favorites. I love the strings, the pizzicato techniques, and the use of both synth and orchestral elements, which Göransson is like, that's his hallmark. I mean, you can say that's Zimmer's thing, but I feel like Zimmer at this point, he's almost completely in the box. Ludwig has kind of made himself the guy who does a little bit of both. But yeah, the percolating synths I wrote around the 5-minute mark were just like heavenly. And yeah, so there's so much. I mean, I could talk about the score forever, but this is a full movie podcast, so we're gonna keep it and keep it.
I will add. I love when a composer doesn't simply watch the movie and say, "Well, I'm going to write something epic, or I'm going to write something more akin to a ballad." This is someone who understands the vision, and I didn't know that about. Well, when you hear it, like when you give it that explanation about Can You Hear the Music being compounded in the tempo,
yeah,
that makes so much. It makes so much sense, and it gives you like a whole nother perspective. Like, yeah, they really thought about every angle. He is not just making a big song.
Yeah. And even, I mean, little self-plug here. I did an analysis of the music for Creed on my YouTube channel. It's just my name, Ethan Morel. So if you want to go check it out. But in that score, Adonis Creed's theme is played on a boxing canvas. Like the bass drum for that, he sources sounds from the cinematic world, which like it's like almost using diegetic sounds to source your music, which I think is so brilliant and such a good way to honor the filmmaking, because I feel like so many composers are just kind of willy-nilly, write some music, get paid, but like Ludwig takes his craft seriously, and
he certainly uses the diegetic thing for Black Panther too. I mean,
oh, for sure,
just going to Africa for years. The dedication is insane.
It's real. Yeah. Do you want to talk about Jennifer Lane's editing? We mentioned it at the beginning.
I'll go into the editing a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that the editing is the biggest standout for me in terms of the movie, other than maybe Killian's performance. I think that the way that she handles the 2 chapters and gives each of them weight is incredible, and also it's just you don't really see films that kind of go out on a limb and edit at a different pace than what everything else is edited at, like in the mainstream or today. And I think that you can see this a little bit going back to Tenet. I think for Tenet, Nolan told Jennifer Lame that it was going to be the hardest thing that she'd ever done, and it was. And I think that for Oppenheimer, it's kind of just a continuation of that, but I mean, in a different way. But I think that you can certainly say that she's maybe the best editor working right now. I mean, her credits include Hereditary, Tenet, Marriage Story. I mean,
boom,
and now Oppenheimer.
And that's range.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, the editing's it felt similar to Tenet, and in a way, those films by Nolan are so antithetical. They're the opposite. There's not a single action scene in Oppenheimer. Tenet is all action, no dialogue. It's like no expo up. It just throws you right in. I feel like
Yep.
one of my gripes with Oppenheimer, and this is super like splitting hairs here, but I did feel like we got expo dumped a little bit in the first 25 to 30 minutes. It was a lot, but like Nolan's trying to tackle a lot with catching us up from Oppenheimer's years in school all the way to when he's doing the Trinity test. There's a lot of ground to cover. So I think he gets a pass on that. But I mean, editing, yeah, like you said, the range of editing those two so smoothly and just so dynamically, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and that I feel like that's the biggest advocate for saying that the pacing is so good.
Hmm.
Because I mean, if you even with amazing writing and amazing acting, if it's not edited well, you're gonna get you're gonna get bored.
Hmm.
You know, and I think that it's so important to the film, and it really wouldn't have been the same without her editing.
Hmm.
Of course. Yeah.
All right. So another huge hallmark of Nolan's production is that he tries to stay away from CGI when possible. He opts for practical use, and I think Mason had some things jotted down about some of the techniques that he used a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, so just for some of the like explosion-esque like imagery,
Hmm.
like when you hear the can you hear the music
Hmm.
cue, you're getting like complimented with just insane like little like fizzes and
Yeah.
stuff. Um, and I think that that's like I was reading that that was done through miniatures and sometimes bigatures, which
Hmm.
is just like a bigger miniature.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the same thing. And then like also like also like changing shutter speeds and stuff
That's so
is
cool.
just yeah, like I think the techniques used for it is really cool. And it's I mean, honestly it kind of reminded me of 2001 A Space Odyssey where, like Kubrick's kind of he wants to be a very like physical filmmaker,
Hmm.
and I think Nolan really I mean Nolan obviously loves Kubrick and he
Hmm.
gets that from him, and I think Nolan just wants to be like so hands-on, and he wants like as little visual effects as possible, which I
Hmm.
think is amazing.
Yeah, and it looked incredible.
I mean, special shout out to when you're not when you're working with those like checkpoints. Special shout out to
Yeah.
set design was
Hmm.
obviously incredible. And one of the big thing that everyone talked about was how about the makeup and hairstyling, especially on Killian from
Yeah, for aging.
for aging. And
Hmm.
even on
Yep.
all of them, the scene in the White House where everyone
Yeah.
reconvenes when he's
Hmm.
given that Medal of Honor, and they're all
Mhm.
like closer to 70 instead of the
Hmm.
50, 60 range that they
Yeah,
hover around for most of the movie was really stunning.
it was very well done. So production design, um, the film does so well. I'm remembering back to I saw a picture of a, a a kid that I went to high school with on Instagram, and he posted a picture of Cillian Murphy and Matt Damon at Princeton during the time of filming. And so to think that, you know, 2022 was being lived in while this film was shot is kind of ridiculous because there's absolutely nothing to clue you in. It completely sucks you into that world. It's easily one of the strengths, the greatest strengths of this film.
Mhm.
Yep. I think that complements the pacing too. You don't ever really feel like you're getting sucked out of the world or anything. It's very it's just it's amazing.
Hmm. And then, I mean, speaking of visuals and just aesthetics, the cinematography. I mean, Hoyt van Hoytema, he did it again. Like
I mean, the dude just can't miss. I'm
no,
sorry.
yeah,
This, I
Uh,
mean, other than Roger Deakins, I think he might be the best working
it's quite
like
possible.
cinematographer
Yeah.
right
a
now.
great, probably my favorite moment in the movie, honestly, was when Jean dies and there's a scene in the woods where Kitty goes looking for Oppenheimer.
Hmm.
Everything is working together beautifully in unison. The score, the lighting, the costume design, and of course Killian and uh who's that actress's name again?
Emily Blunt.
Emily Blunt. Yeah,
Yep.
of course. Their
Yes.
performances were excellent. When she's on the horse and she turns the corner, which is just some pretty fantastic visual storytelling. If you
Mhm.
write it down on paper, it seems so simple, yet it would make any other director smack themselves in the face for not doing it sooner. But she turns the corner and there's a fire that he had lit previously, and it's dawn. That fire is gone, and the score is swirling. And I noticed on second watch, you can hear like the fire ending, the crackle just like crunches and stops. You see the ashes of the once fire as he is shivering in the cold because
Huh.
the one fire he had with Jean has been stomped.
Extinguished. Yeah.
It's been extinguished.
Wow.
And that's something you look at. It's like,
Mhm.
oh well, he's outside, he's cold. But it goes so much further beyond
Yeah.
that.
Man.
A little bit of that is like another example of that is the first and last shot being the little tiny raindrops falling, and that
Yes.
just kind of being an allegory for like dropping bombs and
Yeah.
stuff. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
It's
it's
brilliant.
amazing.
Yeah. Good art reinforces itself in every way. And I mean, we see that all throughout, literature, poetry, music, and film. I mean, you're a big Tarkovsky guy. He's all about that. But I mean, Nolan does a great job here, even and in the small details. The details are everything.
Yeah. And you were talking about the horse shot, Jacob. That really reminded me of Jordan Peele's Nope, which
mm,
Hoyt also did.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, it's basically like he's got everything under his belt. He can make
Mhm.
every single frame of the film look like a painting. It's amazing.
all right, Mason, uh, Jacob, I'm gonna let y'all do your thing on sound.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Okay.
I was
You
wondering
you can
because
start, Jacob.
my main thing that I've been dying to get to was see for me it's just like a few bullet point moments that really blew my mind. The whole movie was mind blowing from a sound design perspective, but I feel like you have to start when you're talking about sound with this movie, you have to start with the gymnasium scene,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
He walks in, this is right after the bomb test is successful. So you're still reeling from the after, like the physical effects of hearing that bomb. Because at first, you know, of course, we all sort of knew that when that bomb was going to drop, it was going to stay silent, and you're
Hmm.
going to take in the awe and just wonder of the scientific step that they had just
Hmm.
taken, and then get slapped in the face with the actual harsh reality of that bomb.
Hmm.
And of course, it's just deafeningly loud.
Hmm.
I was thankful to have earplugs the
Yeah.
first time watching it.
Yeah.
I put them in right when that scene, right before that was going to happen, and
Same.
then
Yep.
I forgot earplugs the second time, and I was like, oh well, it's just a regular theater. Maybe it won't be so bad, and it still rocks you to the core.
Hmm.
Mm.
So you're still disoriented from how loud that bomb is, and you immediately go from everyone clapping and congratulating and overwhelming Oppenheimer to the stomping of
Mm.
feet.
Yeah.
And it is not a
It's sickening.
it it's not a fun pep rally, that's for sure.
No.
Mm.
It's he's emerging from the depths, from the darkness of the bleachers too.
Yeah.
Mm.
Going back to the visual storytelling, he emerges from the dark, and I actually think those footsteps may have been louder than the bomb. They might be equally as loud. I'm not
Mm.
sure, but he's giving that speech and everything. There's a thunderous applause
Yep.
because he's trying to cope with what's just happened. And then he says, I wish we could have used this on the Germans. And everyone's applause gets sucked in, and
Hmm.
you're left with just the creaking of the bleachers and the air of the room. And what was striking the second time watching it was I noticed that when everyone's cheers and claps fade away, immediately
Hmm.
get sucked back, the final thing you hear is one isolated scream. So it's everyone's clap and then just a definitely loud scream for maybe half a millisecond, and then that's it.
Yeah.
And that blew me away. So yeah, that's why the gymnasium scene, I feel like, is the penultimate example of how good and how careful they handle sound in this movie.
Yeah.
Mason, if you want to elaborate further.
Yeah, so Richard King is the like main supervising sound editor on this, and he's been the main supervising sound editor for basically all of Nolan's work, and he's really come like under fire, obviously
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
like
Tenet,
for like
Dunkirk. Yeah.
Bane's stuff in Dark
Yeah.
Knight Rises, Interstellar. Can we tell what McConaughey's saying? I don't know. For I mean, Dunkirk was a little less bad, I guess, but certainly for Tenet. I mean, I think with Tenet, you kind of saw the line was reached. You know what I mean? People were sick of it. People were like sick of Nolan being
Hmm.
like stubborn. And I think for Oppenheimer, like aside from the scenes that you were talking about, Jacob, I feel like it's actually like kind of safe, but like in like the best way possible. Like I feel like the dialogue is the most clear of like any of Nolan's past works. I feel like
I actually think it is the most clear out of like any of his movies.
yeah, I think that that's like you could easily say that, and I think that I think that it's a great move in terms of like the actual sound design of the film. There's an article that Richard King gave that he's telling about like what they use and stuff, and he talked about how they didn't use any electronics, any synth sounds. Everything you hear in the film is all natural, which is basically unheard of these days.
So does that mean that there was
And
no sound design,
well,
like on the
they
back
use
end in
they
post?
use natural sounds and just like manipulate them.
So they sourced all their stuff
Yeah,
organically.
yeah,
Wow.
Yeah.
As opposed to
yeah,
just like farming sound libraries.
yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Which is which is very impressive.
Yeah.
And I think that like obviously you were talking about the Trinity test scene a little bit, Jacob, and I think that like just seeing the visual and having that like realistic impact where like the sound is delayed by like 30, 40 seconds, that had me on the edge of my seat. Just
Mhm.
even narratively, the sound is just like telling the story there. It's telling you everything that you need. And I think that silence in the film is used in a way that is very, very, very powerful. And I think you really, really feel that dynamic range that they're going for.
There's
Mhm.
for sure the dynamic range is massive. And
Yeah, it's
it's
crazy.
all I would honestly say Christopher Nolan, one of, if not like the only directors, at least from what I've seen, that is I imagine him in the recording studio whenever they are mixing and
Mhm.
like finalizing the touches to this movie because what other director from a sound perspective would make Tenet and Oppenheimer? And clearly this isn't Mason mentioned like
Mhm.
Richard King coming under fire. That's not his, I feel like
That's
he's
probably
very
Nolan's
much
call. Yeah.
exactly. He's
Yeah,
given
exactly. Yeah.
he's given very clear directions from out of sound in his movies. And I feel like with a lot of directors, if any directors, if you know more, please let me know. But like
Mhm.
you're not getting like strict instructions on how they want it to sound. And
Yeah.
with Nolan, it's like
Uh-huh.
clearly it's not just like, oh, like
Yep.
they weren't paying attention. It's like that's what he was going for. And Oppenheimer clearly shows that.
Yeah, I think that's why you can, I guess, forgive some of the innovations, I would say, in Tenet. I mean, I don't
Mhm.
really want to get into that now because that's
Yeah.
a little bit beside the point. But I think that, like, uh, I think that Nolan really, really cares about every single aspect of
Mhm.
like the technical part of the filmmaking,
Yeah.
and I think that that's why he's one of the best directors right now,
I mean, and
easily.
clearly it's all technical. I mean, Tenet is the perfect example of that.
Yeah, yeah,
Little to no character development, plot. It's just it's
yeah.
just
It
technical feat and just visual splendor.
yeah. He does it. Nolan doesn't care about
Yeah.
narrative.
He just
He
wants
just
to
really
tickle
doesn't. He
your
got bored
brain
of
and
it.
yeah, stimulate you. Yeah. And he
Yeah.
succeeds, Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
But
in my opinion, it does.
And that's what makes Oppenheimer so good, is that he balanced. He cared about narrative and he cared about technical, and he balanced it perfectly.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it's obviously he has the capacity to do so. It's just he's intentional about the decisions that he makes.
And
Yeah.
some of those intentions being like we were talking about before the show started, like they didn't use any ADR in the
Mhm.
whole film, and he also just like he wants it to be like as much production sound as possible, which
Mhm.
is just, I mean, again, that's unheard of too. And you know, some of those kind of capabilities aren't possible even today. You can't just use production sound. But Richard King talks about in that article about how like they did like as little post production work as possible because Nolan just wants the real authentic sound and performance of the dialogue of the actors that happens the day that they film.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's unrealistic, but I'm sure it's difficult for the people on you know sound crew.
It
That
makes
must,
Imagine
it.
recording the sound of the like atomic tests and stuff.
It's like
yeah,
Jordan Peele sweating,
yeah.
like that. Like it's just constantly that, you
Oh
know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It makes the movie feel warm, you
Uh-huh.
know.
Yeah,
It doesn't feel like
it
the
really
sound. It
does.
doesn't feel like the
Yeah,
sound's coming out of a box.
yeah.
It just
It
sounds
feels
like you're
lived
in the
in.
room with
Yeah.
them.
Uh-huh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like synthesized at all. It's very natural. And I think that specifically for a movie like Oppenheimer, that's like a biography, you really,
Yeah.
really want that. Something with maybe like a Tenet or a Dunkirk probably wouldn't matter as much. But with this, you really want that kind of naturalistic sound design.
I was wondering, how does one, like, I guess, such as Richard King, go about designing the sound of an atomic bomb? Like, what does that process look like? I want to see like the stacks and layers in Pro Tools of
Exactly. Yeah, because all it comes down to is layering about 200 different sounds probably, which is
Right.
yeah,
incredibly impressive. I mean, I'd have to watch it again to actually like really really try to listen to it,
yeah.
but there's probably some odd sounds
Mhm.
that are kind of buried in the layering.
Yeah, and it's probably super intentional, right? Because I mean, people talk about or when you do research on it, I mean, the immense heat. So is there sound of stuff being vaporized?
Mm,
Obviously the impact,
yep.
uh, the shock wave.
Mhm.
There's levels to an explosion that you really have to nitpick and almost be a physicist about and get in the shoes of someone who would be experiencing that or you know testing the device to understand how do I create this sonic environment to be true to what people are seeing on screen because it can really pull you out if you don't do it right.
Yeah.
That's
And you
a
would think that something like this would be easier because it's a realistic soundscape.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that actually happened. But it's something that happened maybe 2 or 3 times
Mm-hmm.
that is, I mean, you can't reproduce that today, you know what I mean? Not the
Yeah,
scale of it, at least
and
for a film.
obviously it was successful because everybody talks about that as being like one of the most gripping parts of the film. So I mean, yeah, bravo to
Yeah,
Richard
certainly.
King and his team because they knocked it out.
Yeah, and the whole team, yeah, it's
Yeah,
very, very impressive.
I mean, that's why audio engineers are scientists, man. I mean, when you even
seriously.
like just
Yeah.
talking about the atomic bomb and understanding and like solving the puzzle of how to even like craft that is
Mhm.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
You're
I
talking about that. You're talking about the Pro Tools session and like how
yes. Yeah.
that's like 200 layers. Little sneak preview for a future episode. But Barbie, which we'll talk about later,
Yeah.
there you can see the Pro Tools sessions for that online right now, and it's cool to look at and
Mm.
very daunting. So
Yeah. I want to see the drafts of the atomic bomb sounds that didn't make the cut because I'm sure
right.
they would have worked, but I wonder what the most creative or maybe like outlandish sound. I mean, they probably all sounded relatively realistic, but you know, I, I'm thinking back to the sound of the Batmobile and the Batman that uh
In
Mason,
the Batman or the Dark Knight?
in the Batman. Mason, help me out with who did was that Mark Mangini who did the sound for that?
Oh no.
Yeah, I
Wait,
can't.
I'm drawing a
wait.
blank.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let
he's
me
gonna look
check
it up.
real quick.
I'm
Oh,
drawing a blank, but yeah, they said that they used the sound of a rocket to sort of base the Batmobile's engine off of when it starts up, and I was just wondering what sort of creative um textures they snuck in there that we probably didn't catch, and there's probably a lot. There's so much that goes into sound design.
Of course.
honestly, there's not any like huge names.
Okay.
There's Andy Nelson who's worked on La La Land, Avatar, Force Awakens, Catch Me If You Can,
hmm
Shrek, Schindler's List, Babylon. So
hmm
Oh wow.
that's the
That's a
biggest
lot. That's
name.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
pretty. That's big.
Yeah.
That's big.
Yeah.
I would be happy if that was my career.
Oh, certainly, certainly.
Also, one more thing about the sound. This is something, we were talking about how directors, only a few directors, if, you know, very few are very like intentional on the sound that is being a part of their movie.
Mhm.
And with Nolan's movies, I I feel like I don't notice this with enough movies, but you'll be watching a scene and people will be talking in like a crowded room, yet it doesn't feel like they're in a crowded room,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And Nolan is one of the few people that understands like the environment and even in his movies that, dialogue wise can be unintelligible, every environment is fully textured,
Mhm.
like to the fullest
Certainly.
without being too distracting.
Yeah.
For
It's
sure.
it's definitely commendable. It's excellent. All right. Do we have any final thoughts on the film before we wrap up here?
It is my favorite movie of the year, and I would say not even close. There are plenty of other. This year has honestly been a great year for movies. Yeah, that's all I can say.
All I'll say is it's one of Nolan's best, and I remember telling some people after Tenet, after he was coming under fire for Tenet, I was telling some people he's gonna go kind of smaller and more like a more grounded film, and it's gonna be like critically praised.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's exactly what Oppenheimer is, and I'm just very, very excited to like see what he does next. I have
Yeah.
no idea like the direction that his career is gonna go into
Agreed.
at this point.
I wouldn't call myself. I wouldn't say that Nolan is my favorite director, but Nolan releases make me the most excited that any director, like any current director, does. Like his releases get me like the most anticipated for whatever
And he
reason.
gets people to the theaters,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is
he gets
extremely
people in
important
seats.
for the industry. So
That's like a dying breed of like I would say him and Tarantino are like the only people where people will
Mhm.
come to the movie by name only.
Yeah,
and maybe Gerwig now, you know.
Yeah, maybe Gerwig
yeah,
now. Shout out Gerwig.
yeah. Shout out Greta Gerwig. Um, my thought is obviously I enjoyed it. I loved it. I wasn't hit as viscerally as I was in my Tenet viewing.
Mm,
There was something. Mason and I both had a fantastic viewing experience of Tenet, and we'll talk more about that later. But I I understood and I appreciated how elegant this film was, and what it accomplished both narratively for Nolan as sort of like a, a almost a reinvention of his identity, and just technically as well. But I think this film is going to age very, very nicely. And I think we're going to look back on it in a decade to come and be like, that is a solid film. I was thinking about, they're not quite similar, but it just made me think of when I watched All the President's Men. I'm like, wow, that's just a great movie. It's just
yep.
well made. It's a good watch. I think
Yeah,
Oppenheimer is
that
better. I think Oppenheimer is better than All the President's Men. But in the same vein, I think it's going to age very well.
yeah, I'd say that, and Oppenheimer's been compared to Oliver Stone's JFK,
Mhm.
which it came out like in the 90s, and there's a lot of similarities, and I think JFK has aged perfectly. So
Mhm.
I think that Oppenheimer, I mean, yeah, it'll age great.
And then
I feel
what?
like the JFK movie might be the sequel to Oppenheimer because they name drop JFK at the end. So if you want to see
Exactly.
a
Yeah.
movie more like Oppenheimer, then
Exactly.
go
Oh,
watch JFK immediately
you
after.
gotta
They said
watch it.
it.
It's amazing.
They said it was like a Disney Channel celebrity reveal or something.
I saw
The
people, this
post-credit scene.
this
Yeah.
jumps back to the cast, which we talked about at the
Yeah.
beginning, but I saw some people complain about how the cast just felt all like the Avengers in a
The
way where
Avengers,
it's
yeah.
just like, Cillian Murphy, Matt Damon, and like Josh,
RDJ. Yeah.
RDJ, Josh Peck, Dane DeHaan,
Let's talk about Dane DeHaan.
yeah.
Dane DeHaan
all,
shout out real quick.
all I was gonna add before we get to the Dane DeHaan is just, these aren't, to me, it wasn't like, oh, Matt Damon's playing Matt Damon. These are great. These are all great actors that are all under the complete control of the script.
Listen,
Dane
DeHaan was fantastic as himself in this film.
I will say that. I mean, I haven't. If I'm being honest, I think I've only seen DeHaan in Spider-Man 2.
Can we get a quick shout out for Rami Malek, the best working actor?
Seriously, Oscar-winning Rami Malek playing a role that's, akin to someone's Hollywood debut. I mean, it was fairly small. Yeah.
It was so small, yet it was very clutch in terms of.
It almost rose to the level of his performance as Freddie Mercury, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Also, on a serious note, Benny Safdie, magnificent job. He was so fun to watch. He was amazing.
I don't know if you all saw this, but sadly, he's not directing anymore with.
Really?
Yeah,
with his brother.
His brother, yeah, he's pursuing a full acting career.
Well,
which
that's.
I mean, if that's what he wants to do, I mean, he's great at both.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Now, in terms of brother directors, in other news, Ethan Cohen's new movie comes out this fall, Drive Away Dolls, and that's his first solo movie. So I'll be curious to see how that goes. And apparently, after Ethan Cohen's solo movie, the Coen brothers are getting back together.
Let's go.
So yeah,
let's go.
we still have the classic brother duo in the game.
Mm-hmm.
If you want a movie rec, go watch Fargo or No Country for Old Men. Anyone out there that's listening?
Then I woke up.
Fade to black.
Yeah, it's so good. It's peak. All right. So if we don't have any more thoughts, I think we can wrap this up and help the people. Let us know where they can find us at, and looking ahead to episode 2, Barbie. We're doing the Barbenheimer. We are about a month or so late, a little under a month or so late to the trend, but you know what? We don't care.
This Barbenheimer is like an official holiday.
Yeah.
I think the trend may be dead, but the day will be remembered and will be remembered forever.
Oh,
Yeah.
and people are still seeing them in theaters, so I don't think it's dead yet.
And retrospectively, they're not going to care that we released it late. So
yeah, who cares?
Yeah.
Like
if you're watching this a year later, whatever.
It's gonna be nostalgic.
Exactly. This is commemorative and it's history.
My last thing I gotta say is, movie so far, movie of the year, give Cillian the Oscar, and it was everything I wanted out of a Nolan movie, narratively and technically. Thank you, Nolan.
I'm just glad I got to see Dane DeHaan in theaters again.
Certainly.
Exactly.
It's always a great day when you get to see something like that.
All right. Mason, where can we find you at? Website, Instagram, whatever.
Find me at masonparkersound.com.
The man's got a website. He's 21 and he's got a website.
Hit it up.
Very professional. He does commission work, so give him a call. You can find me on YouTube. It's a lot of drumline stuff from when I was in high school, and some film scoring mock-ups and some film analysis stuff. My name, Ethan Morel for YouTube. Find me on Instagram at ethanmorel.02. Jacob?
Hold on, I'm trying to see where I can link people. Give me a second.
My Instagram is mason.parker21. Hit up that
Graduating
follow.
class. Yep.
If you want to hit me up on Instagram to talk about movies and music in the DMs or whatever, you're more than welcome to. So
absolutely.
jbw_02. So yeah.
Oh, dude, Letterboxd.
I was literally about to say that.
Okay.
You can find me on Letterboxd at 21mparker.
You can find me on Letterboxd at Ethan. My name Ethan128.
You can find me on Letterboxd, jbwwatches.
All right, folks. thank you for tuning in with us to this inaugural episode. We tried our best, but I can say for all three of us that we had a wonderful time just chatting it up, shooting the bull. And we can't wait to do it again. All right, fellas, thank you so much.